Hi, welcome to Allwood Talkies. This is Lex. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do consider subscribing and press the bell button for notifications. Today we are going to see Antman first part. Movie starts in 1989 inside the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. A man was hastily seen entering a meeting room. He's a scientist as well as a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent named Hank Pym. He was not pleased with the action of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s official Howard Stark for imitating his work. Howard tried to explain that the technology that Hank had developed could be used to save the world, but Hank realized the scary future of his own technology and decided to stop developing it. Fed up, Hank then resigned from the S.H.I.E.L.D. Back in the present time, a man was seen involved in a fight in a prison named Scott Lang. The fight was a farewell ritual between inmates in that prison. That day was the day Scott was discharged from prison. After he left, he was picked up by his friend named Louise. On their way, Louise offered Scott a job to rob, but he refused. He said that he had a daughter, so he avoided getting caught again. He also had a degree, so he didn't have to worry about getting a job. Unfortunately, luck was not on his side. He only got a job as a cashier in an ice cream shop, but not for long. His boss, who found out about his background as an ex-inmate, and immediately fired him. Because he had no job, Scott decided to come to Louise's apartment to meet him. Scott confided that he had just been fired. Louise then introduced him to his other friends, and it turned out that they were planning on a theft. Louise invited Scott to get involved in the action, but once again, Scott, who wasn't ready to get involved in criminal action, refused the offer. Back to Hank Pym, who is old now, he walked into the Pym Technology building. Inside, he met his daughter, Hope, and a man named Darren, who was the leader of the company replacing him for the position. Hope invited Hank to see their latest invention. Darren claimed that he could manipulate the distance between atoms to manipulate the size and density of matter to increase its strength. He then showed evidence of the existence of many soldiers in the wars back then who could destroy the enemy unnoticed because of their small size. Hank told Darren that the mini-soldier called Antman and that it was just a myth and could be real. Darren then invited Hank and the others to a room where he kept his latest invention, they currently developing. Darren showed off their technology, which turned out to be a suit that the company had managed to shrink that he named the Yellow Jackets. He said that the legend of Antman had become a reality. After the presentation was finished and everyone had left the room, Hank, who was still there with Darren, confronted him for showing the technology that he had confined for years to the public. He said that there was a reason for him to keep it a secret. He tried to stop Darren from selling the technology because it has a doomed future if produced in mass. It turned out just after the presentation, Darren had already got a prospective buyer for the Yellow Jacket. Hope, who understood the consequences of the technology, explained that for the time being, Darren could only shrink objects and was still working on shrinking living things. Hope offered herself on a mission to stop Darren from selling the invention because she was Darren's trusted person so she could avoid any suspicion. Hank refused her offer and said that he already found the right person for the mission. Back to Scott, who visited his daughter Cassie, who had a birthday party. He also met his ex-wife's fiancé Paxton. Scott gave his daughter a present for her birthday. Paxton, who didn't like Scott's presence at the party, tried to kick him out. Scott then asked his ex-wife Maggie to talk in private. Scott admitted that he came there because he missed his daughter, but Maggie told him to look for a decent job so he could pay for child support. Only then she would let him meet his daughter freely. After hearing that, Scott left the place. Inside the Pym Technology, Darren, who was in the toilet, met one of his colleagues, Frank, who opposed his Yellow Jacket invention during the previous presentation. He suddenly shot Frank with a pistol that he made to shrink things. Frank turned into a blob, seeing that the invention still didn't work as intended. After that, Darren went to a restaurant for dinner with Hope. There he said that he had a grudge against Hank Pym when he was mentored by him. Hank never appreciated his knowledge. Fortunately, his grudge against Hank led him to be a successful person. Elsewhere, Scott was seen calculating the expenses he needed for child support. He then returned to Louise's apartment, and because in dire need of money, he decided to help Louise and his friends carry on that theft action. Louise, who was surprised, then explained the target where they would carry on their mission. They then got prepared for it. At night, they finally started their action. Scott sneaked into the house by climbing to the second floor and started breaking the house alarm. Scott then sneaked around to find the safe they targeted Luis had told him about. When he found the safe, he was surprised to see that the safe was locked with a fingerprint sensor. He made a tool to break the lock and managed to do so. When he went into the safe, he couldn't find anything valuable in there but a strange red suit. Scott didn't know that he was breaking into Hank Pym's residence, who was spying on his action all this time. Elsewhere, in Pym technology, Darren was experimenting to shrink a living thing using a goat. Unfortunately, his experiment was still a failure. The goat turned into a blob. Despite the failure, he didn't give up and continued his research. Scott, who was now in the toilet, looked confused about the suit he just stole. He opened his bag and checked the suit to look for something special about it. Driven by curiosity, he then wore the suit and pressed the button in his hand. Suddenly, he shrank into the size of an insect. He was shocked to experience such a thing for the first time. Suddenly, he heard a voice trying to communicate with him. He tried to find the source of the voice, but suddenly Hank went into the toilet and opened the faucet. Water came out flooding the bathtub. Where Scott was, he fell into the lower floor where a party was held. He tried to get out of there, but to no avail. He fell into the lower floor again and was sucked into a vacuum cleaner. He tried to get out of the vacuum cleaner and ended up falling on top of the car in the street and was returned to his normal size. Scared, he decided to return the suit back to its place. That same night, Scott returned to Hank's house to return the suit back to its original place. When he was about to run away, police raided and arrested him at the police station. Scott got us a visitor for him who turned out to be Hank Pym himself. Hank explained that he had been observing him for quite some time. He also knew about Maggie, Scott's ex-wife. Hank said that he deliberately put the suit on for Scott to steal. Hank gave Scott an offer whether to stay in prison or go back to his cell and wait for Hank's sign for his next move, which meant working for him. Scott then entered his cell suddenly. Several ants approached him while carrying the Antman suit. He rushed to put on the suit and escaped from the prison. The guards, who realized that Scott had gone from his cell, then alarmed the other guards outside that an inmate had escaped. Hank directed Scott to climb onto the back of a winged insect and flew away from there. Scott flew across the street away from the prison. Scott, who was not used to flying like that, got nauseous and finally passed out. The next morning, Scott woke up somewhere. He didn't know where a woman who turned out to be Hope was standing in front of him. When Scott was about to leave the bed, he was shocked to see ants surrounding his bed. Hope then asked him to meet Hank in the dining room. Scott tried to walk past the ants carefully. He then met Hank, and Hope was not sure about Scott's ability. But Hank, who had been spying on him for quite some time, knew his ability and complimented him for that. Hank then showed Scott how he could order the ants to bring him some sugar. Scott was impressed to see that. After breakfast, Hank showed Scott his secret lab. Hank said that he would help Scott if he wanted to help him too. Somewhere else, Paxton, who turned out to be a policeman, was ordered to hunt for Scott, who escaped the prison. Paxton found out that the last person that Scott met before he escaped was Hank Pym. Meanwhile, in the lab of Pym technology, Darren was doing his experiment again with a goat, but this time he succeeded. He managed to shrink a goat into the size of an insect. He looked very content with the result. Back at Hank's residence, Hank told Scott that a person named Mitchell Carson, the former head of defense at S.H.I.E.L.D., had the ambition to get his hand on Pym Technology's invention. He had been planning to overtake the government for a long time, and he was Darren's main potential buyer for the invention. Hank also explained about Darren, his former disciple, who was obsessed with recreating the Antman. Hank asked Scott to stop Darren from selling the invention, but Scott thought that the mission was too risky and suggested he ask the Avengers for help. Hank refused and said that he had been hiding his invention from the Stark family, which was strongly related to Avengers. Hope once again offered herself to do the mission, but Hank firmly refused. Hope then left the room. After that, Hank told Scott that he just didn't want Hope to end up like her late mother. Hank finally managed to convince Scott to help him with the mission. Scott then started learning about everything he needed for the mission. He learned the necessary skills to be the Ant-Man. He also tried to modify his suit so he could shrink to a smaller size, but Hank stopped him immediately. He said that if he tried to shrink further than what he currently could, he would end up shrinking into the subatomic size and enter the quantum realm where reality and the concepts of time and space no longer applied. He would be stuck in there forever. Scott stopped his plan to modify his suit. Hank taught him how to ally with the ants to help him on his mission, while Hope, on the other hand, taught Scott how to fight. While teaching him how to be the Ant-Man, Hank and Hope also filled him up with the information he needed to know about the Yellow Jacket. Hope said that she was jealous of him because he was the one chosen by Hank for the mission over her. When Hope was about to leave, Scott approached her and they talked. Hope apologized to Scott for calling the cops on him. Hope also taught Scott how to give orders to the ants, and with her help, he finally managed to do it. They then entered the house. Hank then told them about his late wife, Hope's mother. He told them that long ago, he and his wife, who was not as the Wasp, was undergoing a mission to stop a rocket. During the mission, they experienced a problem. They couldn't find any way to enter the rockets. His wife then sacrificed herself to shrink into the subatomic size and was stuck in the quantum realm. Since then, Hank tried everything he could to get her out of the quantum realm, but no use. Hope cried hearing that. Scott kept practicing, until finally he managed to master everything he needed for the mission. The last stage of his training was for him to send on a mission to retrieve Hank's invention prototype belonging to Stark Industries. Scott then carried out the mission. When he was about to reach the place, everyone was shocked to find that the place is Avengers headquarters now. Hank told him to abort, but he refused. When he was about to enter the headquarters, the Falcon got a signal of an intruder. When Scott met the Falcon, he surprisingly introduced himself and even asked for permission to steal something from the building. He even said that he was the Falcon's big fan. The Falcon didn't let him do his intention, and they ended up fighting each other. Scott, with his tiny size, managed to enter the Falcon's suit and broke it from the inside. Later, when Scott returned to Hank's house, Hank was angry at him. But when he showed the prototype that he was told to steal, Hank was impressed. Hank then went to a room where he was surprised to see Darren there. Darren told him that he was happy to find a perfect buyer for his invention. He also wanted Hank to witness the transaction himself. After that, Darren went away. Hank, Scott, and Hope were worried when suddenly Darren called Hope. He said that he just met Hank and told her that he wanted to double the security in the entire PIM technology building. He even insisted to close all the vents in there to avoid any trespassers. Hank then said that he needed more people to help them with their mission. The next day, Scott invited Louise and his friends to Hank's house to discuss their mission. Scott then showed them his suit and his ability to shrink. They were shocked to see him shrink for the first time. Later in the middle of the night, Scott, who couldn't sleep, was missing his daughter. He then decided to use his suit and went to his ex-wife's house to meet his daughter. The next morning, they were getting ready to carry on their mission to steal the yellow jacket and then left for the mission. In the evening, the security at PIM Technology was really tight. Scott then started his action. He shrank and flew into the building with his insect friends, while Louise tried to infiltrate the building to reach the server room. Scott, who entered through the water pipe, finally entered the building through the sink. Meanwhile, outside, Louise's friends saw two policemen in disguise spying on Hank. Louise, who was infiltrating the building, finally managed to reach the server room. He knocked out the guard there and hijacked the system with the help of the ants. And at the same time, Louise's friends outside tried to divert the policemen's attention from Hank by stealing their car. Hope, who came out of the server room, looked surprised when she met Darren. He then approached Hank, who was already there, and they entered the room where Darren kept the yellow jacket. Hank pretended to be amazed. Not long after the buyers finally arrived. They were the representatives of an organization called Hydra, led by Mitchell Carson, Hank's former colleague. Meanwhile, Scott entered the server room to plant the bomb in the system. He ordered the ants to destroy the security system in that building and burn all the backup data back too. Darren, he threatened Hank for hiding the technology from him, hearing that Hank beat him. On the other hand, Scott entered the room where the transaction was held. He was about to jump into the yellow jacket storage. But before that, he tested out if the laser that secured the storage had been terminated. Turned out that the laser was still on. He then asked Louise's friends to hijack the security and turn off the laser. Suddenly, the policemen ambushed them, but luckily the hijacking process was over. Scott then entered the storage to retrieve the yellow jacket, but unfortunately Darren realized his plan and turned the laser back on right after he passed it and locked him in the storage. After that, Darren told everyone that the new Antman Scott had been caught and said that he had been spying on him for a while. Hank ordered Darren to cancel the transaction because selling the yellow jacket to Hydra might end up in a serious problem. But Darren remained on his plan. He suddenly took a gun from his suit and pointed it toward Hank. Seeing that, Hope also took her gun out and pointed at Darren. Suddenly, everyone did the same and pointed guns at each other. He said that his reason for visiting Hank the other day was to kill him, but he retreated when he saw Hope. Scott then broke from the storage and managed to take down the Hydra representatives in the room. Unfortunately, Hank was shot. Darren tried to shoot Scott when he was off guard, but the ants prevented his gun from shooting and attacked him. He then retreated and brought the suitcase containing the yellow jacket with him. Carson also ran away with the shrinking serum. Hope then told Scott to chase Darren and retrieve the yellow jackets. He rushed to chase Darren and managed to beat the guards on his way. Louise also came to help him. When Hank and Hope were cornered, Hank gave Hope his tank keychain and asked her to enlarge its size. And they managed to get out of that place using the enlarged tank. Darren, who was on the helicopter, saw a bunch of ants flying toward him. He then took his gun and shot at the ants. He managed to escape from Scott and his ants. Louise, on the other hand, also fled the scene using his van. Turned out Scott had managed to get into the helicopter on time. The PIM technology building, on the other hand, imploded because of the bomb Scott planted there. Scott's tiny size made it difficult for Darren to shoot at him, so he then slapped Scott with his hand. Suddenly, Darren used the yellow jacket suit and shrunk to the same size as Scott. They fight inside the suitcase when it suddenly fell from the helicopter into a pool. Scott managed to beat Darren and send him flying into the bug trap and got electrocuted. Suddenly, Paxton came and arrested Scott. On their way, Paxton was informed that his house had been attacked by someone with a yellow suit. They then rushed to Paxton's house and found out that Darren was there taking hostage Cassie, Scott's daughter. Scott managed to shrink and fought Darren there. Scott tried to throw his enlarger bomb at Darren, but Darren avoided it. Suddenly, Paxton came and made Darren off guard. Scott took the chance to get into Darren's suit, but he couldn't find a way to get inside. The suit was made out of titanium and was impenetrable. Scott ordered Paxton to take Cassie somewhere safe, but Darren didn't let him. Scott then decided to shrink into the size of molecules and managed to get inside the suit to break it from the inside, making it shrink uncontrollably and destroyed it. Meanwhile, Scott himself also kept shrinking to the size of the subatomic and entered the quantum realm. He tried to enlarge it by clicking the button in his hand, but the button was broken. He then remembered the enlarger bomb that he had with him. He put it into his suit and managed to enlarge it to his normal size. He then hugged his daughter, and when the police got there, he shrunk and escaped from there. When he returned to Hank's place, Hank said that the fact that Scott managed to get out of the quantum realm was a miracle. At the night, Scott, together with Maggie, Paxton, and Cassie, had dinner. Paxton, who used to hate Scott, finally understood him and decided to help him out of the punishment. Scott thanked him for helping him and for taking good care of Cassie. While chatting, Scott's phone suddenly rang. It was Luis. He informed Scott that according to his informant, the Falcon was still looking for Antman. Luis then said that he personally knew who Antman is. In the credit scene, Hank was showing Hope, the Antman suit he had prepared for Hope. Thanks for watching Allwood Talkies. Support us by subscribing to our channel and give thumbs up. Catch you on the next video. Bye, guys.
And? What'd he say?
Subscribe.